purpose of today's seminar is to improve your negotiating skills. Now, we've all negotiated something, whether it's the purchase of a car, a house, or even a salary negotiations. But negotiations is certainly much more than haggling. As I'll demonstrate, it's a process of interactive communications that takes place whenever someone wants something from you or you want something from someone else. And the success of this particular type of communications requires specific applications of methodologies, a high level of skills, and also a carefully arranged choreography between the respective players. Now, negotiations, from my perspective, is a core competency, and from time to time, thereby it requires periodic maintenance, and occasionally you need to open up your toolbox and sharpen those skills. These skills are especially important in a business environment of diminishing returns, where small competitive advantages determine success. And that's what we're about today. We want to help you get that success by sharpening your skills in negotiations, and most importantly, reducing your negotiating anxiety. To do this, I'm going to deliver a series of common sense tactics delivered in a framework that is comfortable to use. And I will also take a moment to debunk some of today's most popular bargaining schemes. So, the first thing you're probably thinking is, how do you benefit from all this? How do I benefit? What's in it for me? Well, if there was a means of increasing your profit margin at no additional cost, you'd probably be interested. No? Well, let's say, for example, you're a small business and you do $500,000 in sales. All right? And at the end of the year, you have a $50,000 profit. So you're working at a 10% profit margin. So one day you wake up and you say, you know what? I'd like to take that vacation I haven't taken in 2 years. And I could use another $5,000. So I just want to increase my profit margin by a modest 10%, not a lot. Then you sit back and you think, geez, I'm going to have to increase my sales by $50,000. And at a 10% profit margin, it's going to cost me $45,000. But on the other hand, if you're able to save $5,000 by skillfully negotiating with your vendors, your employers, and your employees, and your clients, what would it cost you? Not a penny. So what I find is very fascinating is that it's a wonderful opportunity to increase one's profit margins. But you know what? Why do people find negotiating difficult? Well, I happen to believe it's because we're negotiophobic. But how is that possible? We're members of the world's greatest economic power. Why is that we're negotiating slackers? Well, what it comes down to, really, it's the efficiency of our economy. Our economy keeps our supply and demand in relative equilibrium. Like, for example, let's say you're shopping for jeans, right? And you go into Macy's. You go in and you walk over, you see the jeans, you look at the tag, and $97. And you say, geez, I think that's a little expensive. Well, do you go over to the clerk and negotiate? No, not at all. You'll probably then just walk through Macy's and go to Bloomingdale's. And chances are you'll take out your iPhone and scan the tag. And you'll come up with a better place to buy those jeans. Our economy's efficient, it's undramatic, but it stifles our bargaining skills. When you think about negotiations, ask yourself, do you find bargaining embarrassing, tacky, something not done in polite society? Well, most people do. Let me tell you a story. And at the Harvard Business School, it would be considered a case study. And it goes like this. It's December 23rd, and we're home, my family. My dad says, let's go get a Christmas tree. And why he always waited for the last minute, I'll never know. So off we go. We pile into the car, myself, my mom, my brother, my dad. 25 minutes later, we're in Farmingdale, and we're in a magnificent lot of trees. And we're there for a few minutes. The weather's spectacular. It's a cold night. There's a fire burning in the lot, and there's snow and on the ground. It's just a wonderful place. And we pick out a tree. It's magnificent. It's a terrific balsam, 3 times my size. And sure enough, we're standing there, and the owner comes over. And he's a Bunyan-esque type of man. Big, large guy, had a stocking, a knit stocking on his head, suspenders, boots, just remarkable. He's just an immense man. And he looks over and says, "Oh, you find a tree?" And he said, "Yeah, we found a tree." And he says, "Is this a tree?" And he goes, "Yeah, this is the tree." He says, "Sir," he tells my dad, "you have a keen appreciation for Christmas trees." And my dad, and you have to understand, my dad is about 5'4". He fit into a ball turret of a B-17. So my dad looks at him and says, "Yeah, it's a nice tree. How much? How much for that tree?" And Paul Bunyan says, "Well, $15. And I'm saying, "Great, $15. I'm sitting there saying, "Well, this is wonderful. I don't see it." But all of a sudden, I'm starting to also notice my brother and my mother are kind of wandering away. I don't know. I'm just not thinking too much of it. And so my dad goes, $15. Surely you can do better than that. So Paul munches down on his pipe, because in those days people had pipes. And he says, $13. I'll give it to you for $13. And I'm saying, "Holy cow, that's great. $13. Let's take it. Let's go." I'm saying to myself. My dad says, "I tell you, I was hoping I'd get it for 10. And Paul says, please, listen. $12. That's my best and final offer." And my dad says, "Okay, I'll tell you what. I'll give you $12 if you throw in the wreath." And I'm saying, "Holy God, this guy's going to kill us." Yeah, sure enough, Paul looks over and says, "Deal." And that's it. That's how we got our tree. But more importantly, we're walking out the yard, and my dad's carrying the tree, and I'm carrying the wreath. I'm dragging it. It's bigger than me, the wreath. And my dad stops. He puts the trunk of the tree down. He looks over his shoulder and looks back at Paul and says, "Merry Christmas." And Paul says, "Merry Christmas to you. See you next year." And though that story, please remember this story, because it includes a lot of components that we're going to talk about in negotiations. It's a case study. It would be a Harvard business case study. So the thing to remember in this study is that anxious negotiators, myself, would make bad decisions. The first thing we do, we hastily exit negotiations. Like, as soon as I heard $15, I thought that was great. Let's go. Let's get out of here. And then when I heard $13, wow, I thought I too quickly agreed to the counteroffers. And then my dad, he knew how to manage concessions. Not only did he get a tree for the price he wanted, but he also got the wreath. Now that we understand the benefits and what negotiations can do for us, let's talk a little more specifically about what is negotiations. But before we do that, and before we get into the tactics, I'd like to just discuss 5 concepts that I really believe we should study, we should understand. The first thing is, persuasion is not negotiations. 1. 2, everyone has their own personal style that they need to recognize. 3, there are at least 3 schools of negotiations, and I'm going to talk about 3 of the most important ones. 4, negotiations are situational. And 5, what is leverage and who has it? So let's begin. The first thing is persuasion versus negotiations. And this is one of the biggest mistakes many of us make. We often confuse persuasion with negotiations, believing truth is derived from a persuasive and compelling argument. And understanding brings about agreement. Typically, persuaders lay out reasons to demonstrate, do it my way because it's the logical thing to do, while believing the other side will say, thank you for showing us the light. Well, if it works, persuasion can be a cheap way of resolving a conflict. But since the other side has different perception of what reality and their own objectives happen to be, it doesn't usually work. Oftentimes, persuaders have to fall back on making concessions. And since they don't know how to manage concessions, they can get very expensive very quickly. The point here, persuaders give reasons. Experienced negotiators manage concessions to seek an outcome that is maximum gain for them. The next thing I want to just review with you is personal styles. And as Benjamin Franklin once said, there are three things extremely hard: steel, diamonds, or no one sell. Despite conventional wisdom, there is no single style that fits all negotiations. You have to recognize your own inclinations and then adjust to the situation and your opponent. Speaking of style, most of us think that we're competitive, when in actuality, we're more like compromisers or accommodators. Here are the major styles of negotiations that you may recognize. First, they're the avoiders. They avoid confrontation. They're happy with the status quo. For example, when was the last time you looked at your insurance policy, your auto insurance policy? Every 6 months you get a renewal, probably goes up about $40, $50. Did you ever look at it? No, you didn't. Next, accommodators. All right? Accommodators are found in work groups. They're team players. They focus on preserving relationships. For example, yes, boss, I have nothing to do this week, and I'll work on the report and I'll have it on your desk first thing Monday morning. That's an accommodator. Next, the authoritative type of negotiators. They exploit the human tendency to defer to authority, and they'll rely on claims and procedures and policies. Like, for example, yes, Bill, I know you worked over the weekend, but it's not company policy to give you a personal day off. Fourth, the compromiser. They resort to splitting the difference. For example, let's say you're out you're having dinner, right, with a friend. And you're sitting there and your friend has a steak and a bottle of wine. You're having a beer and a hamburger. Check comes and you're saying, gosh, it's not fair. It's not fair. But the check comes and your friend looks at you and says, want to split the bill? And you say, sure. So you're a compromiser. The next one is the competitor. Now, the competitor enjoys haggling. They seek a zero-sum game, and that what a zero-sum game means, whatever goes into her pocket comes out of yours. For example, take this situation. A publisher speaks to an author and says, you want $25,000 for royalties for your book? You're nuts. I'll be more than fair. I'm going to give you $10,000, not a penny more. That we would call a competitor. Next, what I feel is the highest level, and what we should all aspire to, is the collaborative, creative problem solver. They analyze the underlying problem by asking questions to discover mutual interests. Did I hear you correctly? Did you say you expect $250,000 from the sale of the book? Okay, give me $15,000 and I'll take 10% over the gross sales of $150,000. See, that's a creative problem solver. That's what we want to aspire to. The next concept that is really important for us to understand is that, and this is perhaps one of the most important, that there are three schools of negotiating techniques. Let's call them the good, the bad, and the ugly. The first one, as we just left off with, the collaborative creative problem solver. Surprisingly, the best negotiators aren't the competitors. The collaborative creative problem solver also has four unique abilities. First, they're expert listeners. They follow the rule of probe, then disclose. They acquire clarifying information rather than delivering it. For example, did I hear you correctly? Did you expect to get $250,000 from the sale of the book? Next, they separate the person from the problem. For example, I hate guys wearing bow ties. They're so smug, but he's got something there. Next, the creative collaborator can credibly communicate what is important to both sides. For example, it's in both our interests to settle the strike. How about trading some vacation time for the wage increase? Lastly, what the creative collaborator would do is they'll yield to merit, reason, and principle. Never pressure. Okay? For example, you might hear someone say, you can walk out of here if you want and go to Acme Digital, and they might give you a bigger paycheck, but what about the health and the vacation time? The next school I'd like to talk about is what I refer to as the Japanese method. And the Japanese method is very important in saving face. Now, this method is really anchored by two cultural norms. As I mentioned, saving face and maintaining group harmony. For example, if a Japanese negotiator must say no, they'll carefully avoid offending the other party by almost always offering a choice by attaching an if. For example, we're in a BMW dealership. Okay? And the Japanese negotiator might say, okay, I'll trade in my 2-year-old BMW for $5,000 if you give me the new model, the brand new model, for $15,000. Now, it might be outrageous, but it's still a choice, and they're trying to save face. Now, however, if the Japanese negotiator thinks that they might accept an offer, the gap will be smaller. But the important takeaway here is the magic word of if. The last school is the school of intimidation. Instead of saving face, I'll break your face. Now, despite strident protestations, most of us, as I mentioned, are either persuaders or compromisers. And we believe, unfortunately, that the other side are friends. And when we make concessions, we expect the friends to reciprocate. It doesn't work that way because in today's business environment, intimidation is the prevailing negotiating model. Spawned by TV and movies, the school emphasizes immediacy without concern for the future. The egocentrism of the negotiator inflates their perception of fairness of their own position and seek unilateral concessions and are adept at using hardball tactics. Mistakenly thinking the intimidator could be or is a friend, persuaders and compromisers are exceptionally vulnerable. So they need to recognize what the hardball tactics an intimidator uses. First, they seek unreasonable financial demands. This is a genuine reproduction worth at least $1 million. Next, they'll act antagonistically and unpredictably to coerce and confuse the other side. Your house is beautiful. You have impeccable taste, but you must think I'm nuts if I'm going to spend that much money for what you're asking. Right? Intimidators are also confident that the other side will succumb and ultimately make generous concessions. For example, your membership cannot afford a strike. I'll let you keep the same pay schedule as you had last year. Lastly, they care, and most importantly, they care very little about future relationships. For example, you might hear in a boardroom, once I get the board to agree to the stock buyback, the stock will bounce and I'll cash out. You know? And you'll also find intimidators, if they don't get their way, they'll use threats. What's a common one? I'll sue you. They'll walk out. They'll say something over their shoulder. That's a ridiculous offer. I'm out of here. Next thing, they'll always issue ultimatums. You might have heard this one. You have 2 minutes to decide or I'm withdrawing the offer. Where intimidation makes for good drama, it often ends up badly. It either ends in impasse or retaliation by the side that is demeaned, treated unfairly, who comes to regret their decision, gets angry, and then looks for the first opportunity to get even. Keep in mind, it's inconsequential to consider yourself either a soft or a hard negotiator. What is most important is to be hard on the problem, soft on the person. Instead of bluster, use bombs. Soften the other side's defense with praise and humor, because more concessions are received by friends than adversaries. What you need to remember about the Intimidator school of negotiations is that one-sided results are not durable, as demonstrated by 20th century history. In World War I, 15 million people died, combatants and civilians. That was 9,628 people per day. Now, at the end of the war, President Wilson tried his 14 points to bring the world together to make this was the war that would end all wars. But France and Britain wouldn't have it. They imposed the Treaty of Versailles. But they took back from Germany the Saar Valley and the Rhineland, basically impoverishing Germany. And we know the results of that was that someone promised, Germany to regain their dignity. So we fast forward 20 some odd years. At the end of World War II, 71 million people died. What is that? That's 32,400 per day. But unlike the Treaty of Versailles, the Marshall Plan was imposed and it allowed the vanquished to save face. Peace was maintained for the next 70 years. The takeaway, treaties or contracts will never provide you cover. The next concept we need to understand is that negotiations are situational. Whatever tactics you adopt, it must reflect two situational parameters. First one, how important is it to maintain a serviceable relationship after negotiations? And the other variable, how valuable are the stakes involved? Well, based on the situation, there could be one of four approaches. The first approach is accommodative. Low stakes, low relationship. You're at a stop sign. Two cars come to the stop sign together. Who goes first? Well, with a wave of the hand, the problem's solved. Cooperative. Now, cooperative is that there are low stakes, not a lot of money involved, high relationships. Where does that happen? In work groups. The third approach is competitive. High stakes, low relationships. It's when you sell your house. You sell the house at the highest price you can, and there'll be no relationships once the person buys the house and you give them the keys and you walk away. The last one is the one we've talked about before, is a collaborative, creative approach. And that's where it's high stakes, high relationships. And that's, for the most part, what we're going to be discussing. That's the business end of negotiations. The last concept I want to discuss today is leverage. And leverage is usually defined by who has the most to lose. And it has several characteristics of leverage. The first, it's often discernible. You know it when you see it. Also, leverage comes with an expiration date, and it evaporates over time. You have to, when you have it, you got to use it. And you only have leverage the other side thinks you have. You might have to remind them occasionally that you have leverage during negotiations. For example, to demonstrate leverage, let me use a real example that I've experienced. There was a financial services company in Garden City, and they were going to renew a lease, a substantial lease, 50,000 square feet. If that landlord lost that tenant, it would take them a very long time. It would be very costly to replace that 50,000 square feet. So who had the leverage? Landlord or the tenant? In this case, it was the tenant. As life would have it, one day, two executives from the tenant were in the elevator. And sitting beside them, but they didn't know it, was the executive assistant for the landlord. And they're talking and saying, yeah, Bill, all the top producers want to stay here in Garden City, right on Franklin Avenue. They don't want to move. There's no way we're going to be able to move out of here. We got to stay here. So we're going to just renegotiate the lease and remain. Well, that information went back to the landlord. And sure enough, now the landlord understood that he was negotiating against himself. The tenant was inclined to stay. So all of a sudden, leverage evaporated on the part of the tenant and went and transferred itself to the landlord. So what you have at leverage, it's very dynamic. You have to be very careful with leverage, and we'll get into it a little bit more. Now, the last thing to remember about leverage is, as you can see sometimes happens, is what if your leverage is weak? Well, in that case, if it's, let's say there was that tenant situation, you attempt to play on the landlord's fear of uncertainty. After the landlord goes to him and says, hey, I know you're not leaving my building because your producers want to stay here. Well, what a tenant could do, or should have done, would say, you know what, you're right. Our producers really want to stay on Franklin Avenue, but you know what? It's not going to be their decision. It's going to be the front office's decision. You see, we have an office in Hauppauge, and we have an office in Garden City, and unless your numbers are right, there was some talk about consolidating the offices and moving it to Melville. Leverage is very dynamic, and it could change during negotiations, so you always have to be aware of it. Now also, the last thing about leverage is never ever use it as a bludgeon. Like if you have it, never use it over someone's head. The best example I can give you is a true story. It was a caterer, and he had an event that evening, and sure enough, he was waiting for these two grills to arrive. Unfortunately, the truck had an accident. Wasn't going to get the grills that evening. Didn't know what to do. Well, he went to a local hardware store. They had grills, and he goes to the salesman and says, "Listen, I need these grills tonight, and each grill has to be 6 square feet, large. And do you have anything?" And sure, the salesman says, "Yeah, sure we do. In fact, I got 2 of them right here." So the caterer says, "Oh, I'll take them." All right, and the salesman says, "Well, I'll tell you what I can do. If you pay list price, I'll assemble them and throw in the transportation for you." So the salesman didn't take advantage of it. And what happened was he made a future deal. The caterer went back and bought other things from him. So leverage, life is fickle. If you have it, use it, but never as a bludgeon.